Good morning. I'm Rob Clyde, Board Chair of ISACA and Board Director for Titus. And we're here today to talk about the latest advances in cloud-deployed security automation orchestration. With me is Andrew Plato.
Hey.
Andrew, could you introduce yourself? Who are you with?
Good morning, thank you, Rob. I am Andrew Plato, I'm the CEO of Anitian, and we are a compliance automation company, and have been doing this for quite some time.
All right, so compliance, that's been going on for a while.
Oh yeah.
There's got to be, though, some reason why there's so many different compliance companies. There's got to be some real pain points out there that just aren't really getting addressed, aren't there?
There are. I mean, compliance is one of those things that everybody has to deal with. Nobody likes it. It's boring. It's onerous. It's complicated. It actually becomes a bit of an impediment for growth and innovation in organizations. I mean, you talk to developers, and compliance is just this thing that kind of drags them down. You talk to leaders, and they look at compliance as kind of getting in their way a lot, which is unfortunate because it really belies the whole point behind compliance. I mean, compliance main purpose was to compel better security, and unfortunately that kind of isn't happening. So the idea now is that the more you can automate all that, the better, and you can remove some of those barriers.
So you say compliance really isn't happening. What are some of the reasons? I mean, where did we go wrong? Where does it break down?
It breaks down. There's a number of reasons, and I think it really comes down to sort of the bigger pain point that we're all confronting right now, which is complexity.
Right.
There's just too much. I mean, there's too many attacks, there's too many threats, there's too many vulnerabilities, there's too many technologies, there's too many products, too many vendors, too many opinions, too much data. I mean, there's just too much of everything, and compliance is really kind of hurt by that as well. I mean, you take, for example, FedRAMP. So FedRAMP is a compliance regimen for doing business with the federal government, right? Yep. FedRAMP is, it's based on NIST standards. There's nothing wrong with it as a standard. Actually, it's a really good, robust standard. Yep. It's got 400 and some requirements. They're very specific. They're onerous in many ways.
Right.
And it's not that any one of those requirements is bad or wrong, or it's just they're difficult to attain. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of nuance to that. And that complexity is really kind of wearing people down, because complexity leads to confusion. It leads to, I don't know what to do. This is frustrating me. I don't know how to do it right. There's no real clear pathway from here to there to give me like, okay, if I do this, this, and this, I'll get there. Because I think a lot of people feel when you get to these compliance requirements, you can do everything right, but then your auditor can come in and say, I don't like that.
That's not the way I like to do it.
Yeah, I don't like that. So, that's a big problem. I mean, that confusion is, if you're a leader and you're trying to chart a path to build a better business, that confusion is, it's not a good thing for your business.
Yeah, so you were kind of alluding to the idea of automating this would help.
Yes.
Now, we've been automating for a long time, but I think you're looking at automating in a little different fashion.
Yeah, it's getting ahead of the ball here, or the curve, right? So when you hear automation these days, I think a lot of people think, oh, we're going to automate detection and response, which is great. That's awesome. We need to do that. There's awesome, a lot of great technologies in that space. But that's still kind of after the fact. You're automating after you've been hacked, which is a great time to do it, but you
kind of have to at that point.
Yeah, you kind of have to. You got to move that automation to the beginning of the process, where you automate the build and deployment of environments, and you can create an environment where, rather than developers or engineers building out solutions and then bringing the security people in after it's all built and ready to go, and trying to apply compliance or security requirements to that, you're actually doing that in the very first stages. You're actually building these environments from the ground up to have security integrated into everything. So you're automating. You're not only automating the build of the environment, you probably heard infrastructure as code.
Right.
Well,
sure. DevOps, DevSecOps.
Correct.
So yes.
This is security as code.
Okay.
The infrastructure has the security components and controls and configurations integrated right into it. So they're right there. They're always there. And when you do that, you create a new relationship with your developers. So rather, again, than kind of doing it after the fact, You're saying, okay, here's an environment that already has all the requisite security controls. It's already at the baseline it needs to be at. Now you build your application inside that. So you're creating sort of a framework for them to work within, and now security is enabled in that environment, as we like to say, by default and by design.
Okay, well that sounds very interesting. I'm a big believer in this whole idea of, I call it shifting left.
Okay, you're right, yeah.
Move audit and compliance and shift it left.
Absolutely.
Along with security, because security is the only way you can get to audit and compliance. Right. You're shifting it left earlier into the development cycle, and that's what I hear you talking about. So it's right into the infrastructure. So I'm an old-time CS guy, so I always like to know, like, where does stuff run? So tell me a little bit about the stack. Help me understand the stack so that I can actually make this happen.
So this is, it runs in the cloud.
Okay.
And this is where I would say security really is better in the cloud.
And why is that?
Well, it's because of the automation, because you can build these stacks in hours instead of years. So you take your typical FedRAMP compliance initiative. That can take, classic sort of model is it takes a year to 2 to do, because you got to build all this gear and you got to configure it all. It's $1 million in expense. In the cloud, if you automate all that, if you automate the build, the configuration, you automate the whole sort of process of that, you can do a big chunk of that work in just a few hours. You can deploy an architecture, have it already pre-configured. And that gives you a bunch of big pluses, because first off, again, you're starting from a known good baseline. Then another great thing happens. You can redeploy the environment at a moment's notice.
Okay.
So if something's not right, if something's misconfigured, if your auditor doesn't like something, then you can say, all right, just redeploy the whole thing. Bam.
Right. So you kind of have an A/B.
Right.
So
and you can keep testing that, and you can now do security in a DevOps sort of model.
Right.
You can iterate your security, and you can iterate it at speed and scale.
Right.
So the thing about the cloud that is so potent is that it allows you to do that iterative sort of capability, but then you can scale that. So you can start with a tiny environment, get it right, and then zoop, you can scale that up to thousands or millions of hosts if necessary. And every one of those hosts can be configured and managed identically because it's all code.
Right.
So that DevOps process gives you this sort of ability to not only get security in early on, but then refine it little by little and keep maintaining that baseline.
So I love this, and it seems to make perfect sense for newer applications that I can easily get into the cloud.
Right.
What about, and I know this because I've tried, the older applications, if you try to just stick them in a virtual machine and a set of virtual machines and throw them into the cloud, they cost you a fortune. So until they're re-engineered, you got to kind of leave them where they are.
Right.
How do you deal with that situation? How can you bring these kind of principles to help in that kind of a world as well?
Well, you're right about one thing in that, you can't just sort of lift, the notion of lift and shift.
Into the cloud?
It really just doesn't work.
Well, you can do it. I've seen it done, but the cost is extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, and it never quite works. Well, you can't really do that for security either. So classic sort of, let's go for the classic, I've got a big next-gen firewall in my data center. Right. And it's I'm mirroring traffic to it to do intrusion monitoring and application monitoring. People say, okay, well, I'll just lift and shift that in the cloud. You can't. You can't do that because you can't do packet capture in the cloud. So the lift and shift really definitely doesn't work. So what it comes down to is that it's sort of changing that approach to it, that your security control environment where you've got all your key security controls, your SIM, your endpoint management, your vulnerability management, DLP, all these other different controls. When you deploy them into the cloud, once you've got that control environment up and running, you can extend it to any place. You can extend it across the world. You can extend it to an on-prem environment. You can extend it to another cloud environment. Right. So, we work a lot in AWS, for example. People say, well, do you run in Azure? We don't have to, because we can just connect the two and we can extend that into Azure. So once you have that and
once they're microservices and they're services, it really doesn't matter which cloud they're running in? Is that what I hear you saying?
That's exactly right. Okay. It really doesn't matter.
So what about companies, though, that might say, we can't have any security that's outside of our own perimeter? They're still looking at it old school.
That's very much an old school way to look at things. And the reality is that What I would tell people is the cloud, take you, and when I say the cloud in this context, I really mean the hosting kind of cloud, the AWSs, the Azures of the world.
Of course. We're talking public cloud.
Yeah, public cloud. One thing you have to remember is that AWS, for example, they can run an environment infinitely better than any of us can, because that's all they do. I mean, that's their business. So
I love that quote. When I was CEO of a company, I can still remember when I first joined it, we were doing almost everything on-prem.
Right.
For no good reason.
Right.
And I said, I'd like to get all of our servers turned off and move everything to cloud. And I still remember my IT person saying, well, what about all the security? I said, wait a minute. We're a 150-person company. Do you really think we can do security better than Amazon or Microsoft can in the cloud? And the IT person stopped for a second and said, good point. 2 months later, everything was SaaS and in the cloud.
Yeah,
and security was better, not worse, and reliability was better. Do you find that's true for your clients as well? Does security improve or decline moving to the cloud?
It improves significantly, because once you're in the cloud and you start automating things, even small things. I'll give you an example of something that actually just happened recently in my company. Particular environment, we needed the ability to detect hosts really quickly, right? And this customer's like, got to get this, we got to do it. And we're like, okay, no problem, and we're just wrote a Lambda function for it.
Yes.
And you fire the Lambda function every 5, and done, that's it, we're done. That problem's solved. We didn't have to hire, a consultant, we didn't have to go buy a new piece of technology. The cloud gives you those tools, they're just there, ready to go, and there's so much capability around that you can extend that to do things like automatically monitor for things, and now the cloud and the automation and the technology is doing that daily grunt work for you.
Right.
You don't have to worry about detecting a host every 5 minutes. That product will do it. So there's just so much capability, but there's another big thing the cloud gives us that I don't think people realize. It's the agility. It's that ability to affect change really fast. So you look at really high performance companies like Netflix. I'll pick them as they're excellent.
Classic DevOps company.
Classic DevOps company. I mean, they issue, I've heard this statistic said a few times, they issue something like 10,000 changes a day to their environment, which is just amazing if you think about that. And I mean, we're talking about a company that has, millions or if not hundreds of millions of customers. I mean, they run a high performance shop.
Right.
That is an amazing amount of agility. It allows them to really almost instantly adapt to a changing situation. Well, that's the threat landscape right there. The ability to adapt that quickly to things, to issue changes, to be able to sort of move as the new threats or new issues or bugs are coming out. That agility, well, that's security. That's how you do security these days.
In fact, if I remember correctly, they are so confident about their system, they actually run something called Chaos Monkey that runs around and causes random failures in their system.
Exactly.
Just to make sure that their system can actually deal with various kind of failures.
And that is they're a great example of agility all the way. And it's given them, not only is it giving them great security, and they're a very effective company, and they're not alone. There's a lot of other companies doing that. Even small companies can have that ability. That agility is super powerful, and I think that's something that the security industry hasn't quite caught on. That, as I like to say, it doesn't really matter what next-gen firewall you have or what endpoint solution you have. Your ability to affect change in the organization is one of the most profound metrics of your success as a security organization.
So this is music to my ears. As you can probably tell, I love DevOps, I love cloud.
Same here.
I think they are the answer, not the problem.
I
totally understand why it's going to take time to get there, and at ISACA we've done a lot of work and guidance around this. One of the things we just recently did was come out with what we call the Cyber Maturity Platform out of CMMI. I'm sure you've heard of the Capability Maturity Model. Every software development organization has. It's that organization, but we've brought one to security.
Okay.
And it's very much along the lines of what you were just talking about, agility.
Right.
About being able to get resilience. So help me understand how the kinds of things that Anitian works on and that you're so passionate about can actually help the company become more mature, more resilient, If you think of kind of that type
Right.
of a model, and you're probably
Right.
familiar with it, with the 1 to 5 levels and
Sure.
so on, and we don't need to go through all that, but just the concept of how does it move me from just being pure compliance oriented
Right.
to actually being agile, resilient, optimized, those kinds of things?
Well, it really starts with this notion of by default, by design. So,
Okay.
we make a platform that gives an organization a known good, strong baseline against
Okay.
a compliance framework, and it's up and running and fully configured and ready to go in about 2 hours.
Okay.
So that
And it itself is cloud-based?
it's all cloud-based.
Okay,
It's all
great.
runs and executes in the cloud. What that does is that you kind of cut away this super long process that most organizations go through to kind of get to that point. Because that process of deploying an architecture and configuring it and getting it right, that really wears an organization down. And at some point, a lot of organizations kind of wind up in this vendor churn problem where they start arguing over, should I get this product or that product or this product? And that in our world, that's a sign of really immaturity, not maturity. As we like to say, it really doesn't matter what technology you use, it's how you use it. So the faster you can get to that, then you can really start to change the nature of security in the organization. Rather than this sort of reactive, checkbox compliance sort of, rather than being the person who, when you walk into a meeting, everyone goes, oh good, the security guy's here, he's going to complain about FedRAMP again,
Right.
Rather than being that person, you can go around to saying, hey, we've got this environment, we've got this control plane, I'll help you build out an environment that's got all the requisite controls,
Right.
and then I'll help you, development team, with anything you need to keep your application within those security, controls. So that raises the maturity not only of the development
Right.
team, but also of the security team.
So let me take a stab at it using some DevOps terminology.
Sure,
and
go
see if
for
I'm
it.
understanding correctly, and you correct me where I'm wrong and help me understand even better. So if I hear you correctly, what you're talking about is bringing security automation into the DevOps process using cloud. And by the way, most DevOps teams are very cloud oriented. It just makes it easier.
all of them, yeah.
It makes it easier,
Of
so
course.
much easier. So you bring it in earlier, so it's part of, integrated into the continuous improvement, continuous delivery, and most importantly on the infrastructure side, the continuous deployment end
Yes.
of the equation.
Yes.
And you've got integration that's happened all along there so that when I make a change in code, push a button to build and deploy this, and it goes all the way through those automated steps in the pipeline,
Right.
which without that automated pipeline are manual,
Correct.
with lots of
Yep.
potential for error,
Right.
it can then end up actually deployed
Yes.
and meeting the compliance needs, and in fact going beyond, because it actually can provide agility and resilience.
Correct.
Am I catching this correctly?
You got it completely.
Okay.
So the whole CI/CD pipeline has security all throughout it. It's integrated right into it. So when you do a new build and you go to run the your automated testing, the endpoint security component of that, it's already there, it's already configured, it's already implemented the correct policies, it's already
Okay.
logging everything, it's already doing everything you need. You're not developing in this environment where none of the security is turned on and then trying to turn it on later. It's already on,
Right.
it's on in the development environment, which means if the security control and the new code that the developer just pushed run into each other or cause a problem, then the CI/CD
the build breaks.
the build breaks. And now the developers, has to go back and go, okay, how am I going to do this so that I don't break the,
Yep.
the security? So it puts security into that,
Yeah.
so you don't end up developing software or solutions or microservices or what have you that are kind of skirting around security requirements that you have to have.
So
anyways.
talking about that skirting around. So I actually had an experience, and you can maybe tell me how to help with this, but I actually had an experience where there was such a pipeline in place.
Right.
Due to time constraints and wanting to get something come out early, there was a build that was breaking.
Right.
And the manager of the engineering team actually had the ability to change the build breakers, the security controls.
Sure.
And so changed the security controls, which allowed the build to flow through.
Sure.
And sure enough, it flowed through with a vulnerability inside.
Right.
and if you look back on it, it's because maybe there weren't the right separation of duties of who
Yeah.
was allowed to actually change controls. It was put up down into engineering.
Well, see, that's a case where I would say security really can serve a role as an advisor. So, and we've advised customers on exactly that issue. And what I always tell customers is like, look, if some build you've put out there is breaking a security control, well, obviously the first thing is there something you can do to fix the code? If you can't, and you know what, it's a completely legitimate thing for a business to say, we need to get this build out there because our business, our profitability, whatever depends on it. That's a completely legitimate thing to do. And as a security professional, we all have to admit that, hey, come on, they got to make money. We got to get this stuff out there. I would also say, though, as a security professional, it's now my role to say, okay, how can we do what needs to get done here, but still maintain the level of security? What is a mitigating control we can put around that?
Right.
So one of my, our classic answers is, all right, we know there's a vulnerability there. We know this is dangerous. We know we can't fix it right now, but we're going to watch that. We're going to watch it really closely. And anything against that comes up, we're going to jump on it really fast. So we're going to set up special automation in the environment to monitor for that specific threat that we know exists. And if there's anything against that, and this is where technologies like deception technology and such can become really valuable, because you can actually use them and tune them to actually monitor for this.
So you're saying don't just let the engineering manager be able to make a new way to do it.
Right.
You've actually got to have engineering and security involved in order to make that decision to bypass the build breakers.
Correct. But I'd say, and this is where I'd throw sort of the challenge out to a lot of security professionals, you've got to be able to speak DevOps. You've got to be able to talk code. You've got to be able to talk that language. You can't roll into a meeting with developers and do the old, well, PCI clearly states on rule number 3.2.4.2.1, because people are just going to be like, oh my God, shut up. They don't want to hear that.
I'm trying to get my build to work.
Dude, just quiet. You've got to be able to say, all right, I see what you guys are trying to do. Here's the vulnerability. I'll come up with a strategy team to mitigate this so that we can get this build out there. When you become that enabling force, working side by side with developers, now they want your involvement because you're part of the team. You're not this external party coming in to show them how it is. You're part of the solution to the problem rather than the problem for them.
So in this world, still a huge need for security teams and people to work on this, but the nature of what they do changes.
Oh, big time.
What skills? What do they need to learn? What do they need to go out and figure out how to do that they might not know now?
I think the first thing is they really got to get comfortable with the whole model and concept of DevOps. I mean, this is where I tell every security person, read The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim. Gene's he's a friend of mine. It's a great book.
And then the DevOps Handbook, which gives the handbook solution. Yes.
You really have to become comfortable with the whole concept of DevOps, how it works, the language. And I'll be honest with you, as a security professional for 23 years, I wasn't comfortable with it until 4 or 5 years ago. I had to learn a lot of that, and it really does change a lot of the ways you look at things. You need to, if you're not a
It actually changes change control.
Yes, it changes, in a big way.
Change control goes away, it becomes automated. And the whole change control process that security folks have loved and compliance folks have loved forever kind of disappears.
It's not as, and sometimes that's very, that's because it's like, well, it's not as formal, it's not as structured, and it's like, that's good, because the idea is that rather than having this super rigid, formal, slow process, you got this iterative model. Just do it. If it breaks, do it again. Just keep getting it. Just keep iterating until you get it right. So it's another thing I would say to security professionals. You've got to stop letting perfection become the enemy of good. Good security is perfectly fine. Quit trying to make it perfect. Quit trying to make it all wonderful. Yes, you got to learn how to code, but I'm not a programmer. That's okay. It's not about necessarily being able to, write JSON or whatever. It's understanding the concepts, understanding how it works. If you do know how to do that, it's really going to help you, because you are going to be able to. But the last thing I'd say is really important, and this is where security people, I think, your job gets a lot more interesting, is being able to have conversations about risk. So the great thing about this whole cloud automation thing is that it allows us security professionals to start really talking about risk management. What's the risk to the business? That really elevates the conversation up from let's argue about which next-gen firewall we should get, which is frankly not that interesting to most people except for us. And it elevates you up to having a conversation about risk management and what are the strategic goals of the business.
Right.
And that really creates a better relationship between security and the business. So,
well, Andrew, I love this. Has been a fabulous talk. I wish we could talk for another half an hour on this subject. It's certainly one of my favorites, and I thank you so much for coming to this.
Thank you, Rob.
We heard some great calls to action from Andrew for security people. One was learn about cloud, get comfortable with what that actually means to do a cloud deployment and how you can actually automate compliance, which then we found has a lot to do with the whole DevOps process. So if you're a security professional, become familiar with both DevOps and cloud, and then how to do compliance in an automated fashion. Thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure talking today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.